All right, welcome everyone to our Food for Thought lecture series. Today we have with us our wonderful guest, Kristen Denny, who is, um, this is her third session on the election primer mini-series. Today she'll be talking about Congress and what's next after the election. And we're gonna go over what happened. So I'm humbled and happy to have you here. Kristen was with us the day of the election. We watched it together. The first results come in. So I think it's nice to wrap it up with her.
Yes.
Send it off to Bill so he can do his intro.
Well, I mean, all of you know Kristen. She's been with us for a long time as a professor, taught several courses for us, continues to teach. Hopefully we'll be back on campus again soon when we're all allowed to be back on campus. And I've always, from the first time I met Kristen, I was always so impressed with, and initially I first met her, she was in the private sector, and her knowledge of just how people work and how the media covers private sector, just I was blown away. And then over time I've come to know her as much of a pundit about politics as she is about inner sector kind of global business politics. And as some of you know, she was the brains behind the current mayor of Washington, who not only got elected, but is doing a really pretty great job in a very difficult time. So we're so lucky to have her, and we're so grateful. Kristen, thank you so much for joining us today. And, you know, one of the things maybe you might talk about a little bit is, I know it's getting way ahead, but there are a lot of people speculating about how long Biden has before he loses the Congress. With the typical switch of the Congress in the midterm. So you're going to talk about Congress. Maybe part of what you could talk about is what happens now and then what happens 2 years from now.
Right. And as you know, with these balances of power, you know, when a new president comes in, by the way, thanks for having me, guys. I'm glad to be here. We got a lot to cover. So one of the things, and Jeremy, you helped me, if I want to talk about what you want to talk about. So go ahead and, you know, send some questions my way and then we'll get to them. Okay. But I want to talk about what you want to talk about. Yes, the midterms are always looming. And as we know, we're going to start off by just doing a quick little review about Election Day. We all kind of know how it went, which, by the way, national observers absolutely predicted that it would go the way it did, in terms of there being very, very tight races to call in certain states. And then also that Trump would reject the results, anything that didn't have him winning by a large margin, he was going to reject. So all of the national observers knew that this was a possibility, actually expected it. What we ended up with was Biden with 306 electoral votes, and Donald Trump's 222 or 232 rather electoral votes. The threshold for victory is 270. So Joe Biden was able to flip certain states that Trump won in 2016. Those states are Georgia, Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin all voted for Barack Obama. And that's why Hillary Clinton lost in 2016. Now, you also know that these margins were very, very slim in these states. And, you know, then the subsequent court battles and that kind of thing. The Trump campaign was seeing the same results in their internal polling leading up to Election Day. They knew they'd already pulled out of Michigan. I think we talked about this a little bit when we went on Election Day. They'd already pulled out of Michigan. They'd already pulled out of Wisconsin. They kind of put all their eggs in the Pennsylvania basket, much like Biden did. And when Arizona is kind of an interesting thing, and we'll talk about that in a minute. How did Joe Biden do it? Well, he took the lessons that were learned from 2018, the gains that Democrats made in 2018, and just kind of built on them. He did his most campaigning, albeit modified because of COVID, in Pennsylvania, as did Biden, or as did Trump. Michigan went a little early in terms of, you saw it trending to blue a little bit early on in the election cycle, and they just kind of built on those gains. Now Trump turned out more people, but you know what? He didn't turn out any new people. He didn't turn out people beyond his base. And by the way, neither did Joe Biden. Joe Biden really didn't turn out people outside of his base either. If you want to kind of throw the suburban college educated whites that turned out in 2018 into his base, but they normally are swing. In other words, they're normally, you know, they're independents and they don't focus a lot on political party. They don't consider themselves to be ideologues, that kind of thing. But I think because of COVID and a couple of other things that happened, they were just paying attention. More people were paying attention to this election, like sustainably so, than any other election in modern history. So, which was, and again, you saw that with a record turnout on both sides. The other thing that Biden did that Hillary Clinton did not do was turn out very important constituency groups in certain cities, in certain states. That constituency group is African Americans, and he was able to turn them out in Pennsylvania, like Philadelphia, Pennsylvania for one, or Milwaukee, Wisconsin for another. Hillary was not able to do that. So again, I go through that a little bit to kind of demonstrate that there was not something magical going on here. This is kind of how politics works. There was nothing interesting that stood out. It was literally an extension of what we were seeing in 2018. Georgia. Let's talk about Georgia a minute. Democrats thought that they had a chance in Georgia. They weren't counting on it. So when they were counting their electoral votes, they never included Georgia. But Georgia's been trending blue. It's been trending blue for a little while now. I'm not going to sit there and say it's a blue state. I'm not ready to say that, but it's been trending that way. And it's a couple of factors. Added population in the Atlanta metro area, but also quite a few, their diverse populations have really grown and have, excelled and become, a very important part of the fabric of the makeup of that state. One of the things I mentioned in the paper was, I think that's why Trump got so much pushback from the Republican officials that he was trying to put pressure on regarding the election, because the current governor there used to be the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State runs the state elections. I think he knew, as well as the current state Secretary of State, both Republicans, that the state was trending blue. So that's why they didn't, they put up a big front with him in terms of trying to push back on Trump. But as you know, even if Trump was able to flip the results by pressuring these guys in Georgia, it wouldn't have been enough electoral votes to actually get him to win. He became obsessed with that later. I'm not really sure why. I think he just thought he shouldn't have lost it. The thing about Arizona is that, like Florida, they have a lot of part-time residents. But the difference between Florida and Arizona in terms of the early vote is that Arizona can count their early vote up to 12 days after the election. So whereas Florida, they start counting the day of election day, but they wait so people can send in their votes to their mail-in votes in Arizona up to 12 days after the election. So it was hard to know who all was voting. That's my point. It was hard to know who all was voting in Arizona. But again, we're talking about the suburbs of Phoenix that had already kind of started to turn in 2018, and they just kind of came out big for Biden. Let me see. So I'm gonna grab a question here. The question is, what's the best way to protect voting rights in swing states? So, okay, this is a good time to cover voting rights. So each state plans, underwrites, and executes their elections. It's a state thing. There has been many, many, many times over the last 50 years or so where there's been many efforts to try to federalize elections. In other words, so that everybody is working from the same, how-to sheet. That has always failed miserably. And frankly, the Republicans are the ones that stop it because they're all about states' rights, or they were before Trump. And so they would always stop it. So each state is different. Okay. Now, does that present a huge, big problem? Not necessarily. In other words, we can work with it. So there's not a whole lot that Biden can do other than, encourage Democrats in these states that have any, like give them Democratic governors, Democratic AGs, Democratic secretaries of states, Democratic legislatures to put laws on the books to protect voting rights. Now, is Biden going to take that up as part of his platform to federalize elections? Absolutely not. Okay, he's got bigger fish to fry, and it's just not worth his time, quite frankly. So it's up to the states. The other ironic thing about all these, false claims that Trump was, pushing during this, after the election, were actually, these were, in terms of like mail-in voting and how that was going to work with COVID, a lot of these laws were put on the books by Republican-controlled legislatures. So he was attacking these laws that Republicans had made in these states. So again, this is multi-layered, and frankly, I've said this before in these talks, it's a problem. It's a problem that needs to be addressed in terms of securing the federal government's role in securing elections, preserving voter rights, making it more inclusive, that kind of thing. And like, in other words, it's a problem to be solved if anybody wants to try to tackle it. But yeah, right now it's a state by state. It's a state by state thing. The one thing about the other thing that I want to mention before I get off Georgia is the wildness that occurred with the two Senate runoffs. So first of all, you rarely have two Senate seats up at the same time. They stagger it for obvious reasons. But if you have something like this where a sitting senator resigned his seat, in this particular instance, it was Senator Johnny Isakson from Georgia. He resigned his seat in the middle of his term for health reasons. And it differs from state to state, but in Georgia, the governor can appoint somebody to fill out the term, or it's a placeholder until the next election cycle. So that's what happened with Kelly Loeffler. Senator Kelly Loeffler, she was appointed, and then the next time the election cycle came up, she ran for the seat. And it happened to be when Purdue was up as well. But it's very rare to have two Senate races up at the same time. It's even more rare to have both of them go to a runoff. Not every state has runoffs. A lot of states just, whoever had the most votes won. But in Georgia, they have a runoff. Conventionally, in these runoff situations, and I think this is something that I can say kind of broadly, it favors turnout, and Republicans are a little bit better in that kind of turning people out for a runoff. I assume that I was going to say, have any of you ever voted in a runoff? But but so, so now they have these two runoffs, and, Trump's messing around the state anyway, because he's mad about his loss. And it just becomes this completely complicated, needlessly so, ridiculous spectacle. And then Trump is trying to force these poor state, officials by threatening to derail things for Loeffler and Purdue, which he did. And while they were, wrangling with Trump, the Democrats were putting together their turnout effort, and it worked beautifully. And so now we have two, Democratic senators from Georgia, and that makes the Senate 50-50. And because Kamala Harris is the vice president now, she is the tie-breaking vote. So that was, and I actually think that one of the reasons why Senator Mitch McConnell from Kentucky did not come out sooner and say Biden's president and that kind of thing, the election's over, is because he didn't want to depress turnout for this runoff. So he wanted these big Trump voters to come out for them in the runoff. But, Trump derailed that whole thing, as he's known to do. And basically screwed the Republicans big in the Senate. So, yeah. So anyway, there's another question. Yes, the question is that the Democrats, stayed focused on message, and we're going to talk a little bit about this, about the importance of message, regarding stimulus and COVID and things that real people cared about. And it is a winning issue. In fact, I think the fact that the Republicans kind of tabled it, I don't know if you guys were paying attention or remember that Trump was like, I don't think 2,000 is enough, or I don't think whatever it was. I think it was 1,200, and he said no, it's got to be 2,000, and so he, that was him just trying to insert himself into that debate because I don't know, I guess he felt like he was being ignored, but it just kind of muddled the Republicans' message on that. Now, yes, it's a winning issue, and what happens now with the Democrats, they will absolutely push for the stimulus. In fact, the two things that the Democrats will do right away in Congress is the stimulus and then vaccine distribution. Those are the two things. They might do vaccine distribution first. The Republicans have a big hang up about these stimulus checks. And they'll have to work through that a little bit. But I do feel like that Mitch McConnell is going to be in a cooperative mood. He cares about his legacy. He's in his last term. He was just elected. He was just reelected in November. He's in his last term. He'll still be minority leader. And he's got a lot of sway. But I think he'll be a lot more cooperative with Democrats now. Because I think he cares about his legacy. And he is very focused on turning the page on the Trump era. So down the road a little bit, 6 months from now, I think the next thing you'll see Democrats try to do is infrastructure. And I think that you'll see Mitch McConnell hand that to Biden on a silver platter, because that's something that everybody can coalesce around. And then also, McConnell is ready to cooperate. So that's very, it's fascinating how those dynamics have kind of worked themselves out. And by the way, all of the things that I've just been talking about have been made worse or have been more complicated because of Trump and only Trump. So we, what do I expect is going to happen in the terms of, these election laws that were put on the books regarding because of COVID, Do I think they stick? Some, yes, in some states they will. You will see some Republicans in Congress try to push this narrative that it needs to be investigated, these fraud issues. And you'll hear a little bit about it. You'll see a little lip service, but nothing will happen. And the states can do their own thing. Some of these states, you will absolutely see some of this drawn back, and it will, basically, take away rights rather than, grant them. So also what's very interesting, and I think it remains to be seen, what happens inside the Republican Party. You have two very big factions that are at war. And I don't say that lightly. They're at war. It's the establishment, which I call that the establishment. It's like the Mitt Romneys and the, Lamar Alexander, he's retiring, but they're the establishment. And then you have these new Trump Republicans. I don't know who emerges as the new leader of the Republican Party. I don't know that yet. And here's why, because I have to see what happens to Trump post presidency. He did not, this is a new thing. He did not pardon himself. And by the way, we all thought he was. He did not pardon his children. So and he has quite a bit of legal liability awaiting him in the private sector as a private citizen. I need to see where that stuff goes. I need to see how that affects him. I need to see how he manages to make money. I just need to see a few things to know who the leader of the Republican Party is. I know that there are congressional leaders that are really ready to turn the page, but I just don't know. Bill, do you have any comment on that? What do you think?
No, I don't know. I think that I think Trump may be over. I think, McConnell's no dummy. So he's been pretty much cutting Trump's throat as much as he can. And even, I think, making it possible, we'll see if Biden pushes it, making it possible for Trump to actually be convicted. Mm-hmm. And I think McConnell actually would like that, because then they're done with Trump, whoever. But there doesn't seem, at least to me, to be a natural Republican leader. You talk about the establishment, yes, but they all seem to be older, right? Yes. And kind of done.
Yes. And
then the younger ones are the ones that threw in with Trump. Mm-hmm. McCarthy and Rubio and mm-hmm. all the firebrands are Trumpers. And I don't know that they can leave that behind. I don't know how they do that.
Right.
You never know. You know politics better than me. They could all turn around and vote for impeaching Trump. You never know what people are going to do. But
right. I don't, and this is the reason why I hesitate to make any kind of prediction right now, is because in the Trump era, you don't know. And it's too hard to try to predict when it comes to him. And I just got to get a little bit more information. It also remains see how, if Trump is interested in this, and you guys know Trump better than me, right? Because you New Yorkers know him better than me. We got to wait and see if he's interested in it. He may not be interested in work, since he's not working towards him, like getting himself, president or winning himself, or he may not be that interested. So we just got to kind of wait and see. I do think that his influence on some of the party will absolutely, it doesn't go away, it doesn't evaporate, but I don't know how these same people will feel, a year from now, if Trump's not engaged. I don't know. We have to wait and see. I was just reading a question. Ivanka Trump might run for Rubio's seat. Does she have a chance? Absolutely. Yeah, if she wants to run, again, that remains to be seen. Can she win a primary? Absolutely. No doubt. So, I guess if she wants to run against Rubio, I know Rubio's not great about that because Rubio, has been very loyal to Trump. So but anyway. So here's a question. This is a good one. I am very anti-Trump, and I'll be honest. I'm a Democrat. I work in Democratic politics, but I also am the wife of a journalist who has been attacked relentlessly by Trump over these last 4 years. So yes, it's personal for me. So I'll admit that. There's 74 million people who are still Americans. If the election is not investigated and enhanced, how can Biden help heal the divide the nation faces? So this is my best answer for that. The issues that arose regarding the legitimacy of the election were pushed by one person, and that's Donald Trump. And he was acting his own self-interest. Now, these things were litigated. In fact, if you notice that Biden went out of his way to stay away from that and not talk about if there were lawsuits that needed to be investigated, if there were legal matters that needed to be resolved, he let those things take its course. The problem is you got to have evidence in our current justice system. They had none. We can take certain instances, for example, like let's take Pennsylvania. I've heard many Republicans, including Trump, talk about Pennsylvania being kind of the reason why that they call the results illegitimate or there's fraud. But the state legislature were the ones that passed the laws that said that in Pennsylvania, the mail-in votes were not going to be counted until after the votes cast on election day. And so it made sense that when you went to bed, if you went to bed on the night of on election night, and Trump was winning and you woke up and he was losing, that makes sense. That it was known that the Democrats were pushing their people to vote via mail-in, totally legal. And there was one county, Allegheny County in Pennsylvania, that did have some legit issues that were investigated by the courts, and they didn't see that it was enough fraud to overturn a state's election results. So again, I don't think Biden has a role here. And he shouldn't have a role here. This is not about him trying to convince the American public that he should be president, because actually he won the popular vote and nobody's challenging that. What's interesting about the popular vote versus Electoral College is, and this has been an ongoing debate forever, that now that we have the ability to count votes in real time, that it should only be popular vote. I'm one that has always been in favor of Electoral College because it gives some of these states that don't have as high of a population more of a voice, quite frankly. But, if somebody just wants to count popular votes and not do Electoral College, let me be very clear. Republicans would have a hard time winning the presidency ever. So again, when people are saying throw out the Electoral College, they don't realize what they're saying. Okay, because it comes from the right a lot, and Republicans would have a hard time winning any elections, national elections, if it weren't for Electoral College. Is there a chance that Trump might break away from the Republicans' track? Yes, absolutely, absolutely, and he might have some success. This is a good time to talk about third party. Okay, so again, this is something that's been debated a lot over the years. There should be a third party. The problem with that is just implementing. You could have a movement that a movement that in which you say, you know, we have enough enthusiasm, enough support, we can start our own party. But then comes the work. You have to register in each state. You have to make sure you have enough support slash voter slash, you know, whatever, all your, you know, T's crossed, everything in the state legislature to make these things happen so that you can get on the ballot in these states. Ballot access is always the problem when it comes to third party. And it feels like it's doable until you try to do it. So again, if Trump has the wherewithal to make sure those things happen, okay, then he can do it. He can do a third party. And people have done it. You know, you remember for like the hot second that Kanye was running for president and he was trying to get on the ballot in certain states. You know, and he did. I think he got on the ballot in Wisconsin. I don't really remember that, but it's but you know, people that go into that and say, I'm going to run on my own party. Well, it's not as simple as that. You got to get on the ballot. And that requires some, you know, good old fashioned bureaucratic wrangling with the states, you know.
And if you know, Kristen, if you look at this historically in the US, even someone who, you know, obviously no politician is perfect, but someone as historically celebrated as Teddy Roosevelt,
Yeah.
who had been a former president, who his first term was because McKinley had been assassinated. So he could, by then, there was Franklin Roosevelt was the one that his 4 elections,
Right.
So there was no 2-term limit.
Right.
Roosevelt couldn't even get enough traction. In fact, he ended up throwing the election to the Democrats.
Right.
Ross Perot more recently actually again threw the election to the Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
So the third party movement more than likely just siphons probably liberal Republicans and conservative Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
And there are more Democrats than there are Republicans.
Right.
So once again, if you really think this through strategically, even if Trump had the money and the ego and the time and whatever, more than likely his third party candidacy would elect a Democrat.
Right. That's true. That's true.
So again, like you said, I think once you get to the real details of it, look at Mike Bloomberg.
Yeah.
Sophisticated, national network, appeals to the middle, tons of money. He couldn't get anywhere.
Yeah.
He got nowhere.
Yeah,
So
you know,
it just doesn't work.
It doesn't work like you think it should, or it feels like it's easy, you know. And I want to say this about, you know, using Bloomberg. Okay, so this happens a lot. So Bloomberg was a Republican when he was mayor of New York City. And then when he decides to run for president, he switches to Democrat. He runs in the Democratic primary. Again, even though there's a bunch of Democrats that are like, we like what you're saying, we like who you are, there's so many things about you that we like, but hey, you're an interloper here, and you got to serve your time, you got to do your due diligence. So again, as you know, and somebody like him who is pretty successful in life, right? It's just an eye-opening experience. I always say that about politics. I mean, it's something that you can have a successful career doing one thing your entire life. Then you go into politics and it's like all that has been erased. It's a whole new ballgame. So, okay, let me ask or get back to another question. So the president talks about unity. What gets measured gets managed. How do we measure unity? Well, that's a good question. I think for Washington observers, and this may not answer your question, so I apologize, but for Washington observers, it'll be with how Congress acts. And I do think that you have, with Joe Biden, you have somebody who knows Congress very well. and is an animal of that body. Now, Obama, we've talked about this before, Obama did not have any respect for Congress, and it hurt him. And so Joe Biden's not that guy. Joe Biden has a great relationship with Mitch McConnell. They have a personal relationship. So I think that we will first measure it by how many things are done on a bipartisan level. And I have said what I just mentioned earlier, it'll be things that everybody can kind of get behind. It's going to be vaccine distribution. It's going to be stimulus. It's going to be infrastructure. It's not going to be some, it's not going to be Medicare for all. It's not going to be, college debt, forgiveness. There will be some college debt stuff, but it's not going to be forgiveness. Okay. So these are the things you're going to see. And if we feel like that there's more of a spirit of working together. And again, we have to wait and see on this, because the midterms are around the corner and some of these Republicans are up for re-election and they're in very red districts or states, and they, but we'll see. But as long as you're delivering product to your people, it doesn't really matter who you worked with.
That's why I'm shocked that Trump never had the patience to get an infrastructure bill.
Oh, me too.
Infrastructure works for every single member of Congress, because every single one of them will get a big project for their district. And that's jobs, and that's money, and that's economic development. So whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or a liberal or a conservative, a big infrastructure bill, which is needed and which will stimulate the economy and will mostly employ Americans, and will mostly employ Americans who are working class and lower, it's a no-brainer. And with interest rates at historically low levels, it's fiscally responsible as well. This is when you should buy a new house. This is when you should borrow, because you're locking in an interest rate that's cheap. I mean, for the US government, it's almost zero. So I think if Biden does stick to the playbook, does the stimulus, does the vaccine, and does infrastructure, you could see the country really coming together 2 years from now, because those things are for everybody. Everybody benefits.
And Biden, and like I said, Biden cares about these relationships. He also knows kind of how it works, and it's not rocket science, but you do kind of have to know how it works and how everybody's positioning themselves politically, and you have to provide political cover and that kind of thing. And Biden understands this, so he also knows that's the best way to show unity, or that he's the president for everyone. What are the pros and cons of decreasing barriers for more parties to get on the ballot? So I don't know if there's any cons. I mean, other than, sometimes other parties can just be distractions, because they take on these platforms that are just kind of crazy and wacko and all that kind of thing. But there's nobody's trying to prevent this from happening. There's just a process. And by the way, you have to do it 50 times. And it takes a lot of resources, and it takes time, and it takes patience. And I don't think there's a lot of people that say, no, it can't happen and we won't let it. It's just, in order to do it, you have to be, ready to fight the good fight. It takes time. So again, I don't think that, there's any pushback, especially on the federal level. And again, you get into some of the politics of these states, okay, and that could be another story. They might be against it, but again, that's not nobody. There's not one party is not responsible for this. In other words, the Democrats didn't set it up this way, the Republicans, that's the way it is. And so, and each state has their own rules. That's it. That's just kind of the way it is. So, want to say one more thing about the Trump thing. Yes, I don't think his influence was, its scope surprised everyone. But let's wait and see if his influence stays this intense. And then if it does, then let's have this conversation again. But we have to see if Trump's going to pivot to making money, and he's got a lot on his plate. So let's just see how engaged he stays. That's all. Bill, what do you think about that? Regarding Trump's influence?
Again, I think that most Republicans really want Trump out of the way, so that they, the net 2 years and particularly 4 years from now, Joe Biden will be 82.
Yeah.
Even if he's successful, he's vulnerable.
Yeah.
And he might step aside anyway.
Yeah.
So if you're a young up and coming Republican, you see 4 years from now is an opportunity of a lifetime. And the last thing you want is to run out a retread loser, regardless of how many votes he got.
Yeah.
So I believe that the Republicans, both establishment and radical, will actually, behind the scenes, if not in public, try to make it impossible for Trump to really launch an ongoing political presence.
Right.
So
I have to agree with that. And I'll wait to hold final judgment, but I do too. But we'll see. I mean, look, nothing about Trump has been normal or follows any kind of right. So let's just, I shouldn't predict when it comes to him. So the next question is regarding the Electoral College wouldn't get rid of it, force the Republican Party to modify its positions. Yes, but there's a lot of people in, what we call flyover America, who don't have a voice without the Electoral College. And they don't want their Republican leaders to modify their positions. This is the best way for them to have a voice, is through Electoral College. I've always said the reason why I'm against it personally is because if we got rid of it, then candidates would only campaign in 15 states. And then people say, well, they do that anyway. Well, not really. I mean, Wisconsin wouldn't be part of that. I mean, so it's like, I don't think getting rid of Electoral College is the answer. And I don't think that, I think that the people in the flyover, the northern tier states that are very red, that don't have a great deal of population, they need a voice, and this is the best way. It still matters. And Nevada, on election night, everybody's like, what's Nevada going to do? That's not a big state. Doesn't have a lot of electoral votes, but everything matters. And so, that's just my opinion. The next question.
From a practical point of view, if you can't amend the Constitution for the Equal Rights Amendment, how could you possibly think you'll be able to get 3/4 of the states to agree to get rid of the Electoral College when you'd be asking many states to vote against their own interests?
That's right.
It's, in my humble view, it's never going to happen. So just forget about it.
Right. Not anytime soon. For sure. So the next question, how about our environment, immigration, and Iran? So we know what's going on with the environment. This administration, the Biden administration, is taking that very seriously, and that will be a big priority in his platform. Immigration, well, what they'll do is unwind some of these things that Trump put in, the more divisive things that Trump put into place, like the bans, like the separating of children, the big things. Now, I think, this is just my opinion, I think that the Democrats should take a more detailed, I guess that's the word I'm looking for, detailed position on immigration, and be a little bit more forthcoming about what they see, what that looks like. Because what we do know is that the American public does want border security. They do want some accountability there. Okay. So Democrats can't sit there and say, okay, we're against that. I mean, they need to have a policy. It's such a political football right now that they shy away from it. But let me say, guys, even though they don't really have an immigration platform, it doesn't seem to hurt them with voters in a big way. Iran's going to be a big problem. So I'm not a foreign policy expert, but it's going to be a thing. And they got to clean that up. So, I'm not really sure what happens there, but I think it's a thing. It's definitely something that they're going to have to pay attention to. So the question is, did the political maneuvering by Pelosi before the election cost her those battleground seats and threaten her majority? Yes, I think that yes, Pelosi, I don't want to lay it all at her feet, but I do think that some of this hurt Democrats, some of the way she managed Democrats in the, this election cycle. I'm surprised she won re-election for speaker or leader. Some say, the Democratic leadership is elderly. Pelosi's 80. Steny Hoyer's like 79. Jim Clyburn, all good people, all very good legislators, good legislators, but they're older. So I think what you're seeing though, especially during the Trump era, is that when you look at some of the new up and comers like AOC, they don't want to put her in leadership yet because it just provides too much of a political contrast with the socialism and things like that. Not to say that some of her policies will kind of creep in. Don't get me wrong there. But from an optics perspective, they wanted to keep that out of leadership. Now, I don't know. I mean, it could have helped them because whatever they were doing didn't help them. I'm surprised that she won re-election for her speaker or for, the leader. So it's,
She's a really good politician.
She is. One thing about
good at what she does.
Yeah, one thing about Nancy Pelosi is she's really good at wrangling votes.
Yeah.
And that's what it's about in the House of Representatives. And that, and I've heard her say in reference to AOC, because there's this perception that she's not giving AOC her due, or she's not giving her, more respect or whatever. And I think Nancy Pelosi sees it just by votes and says if she could get more votes in the caucus, then she'd have my full attention. Mm-hmm. AOC is more of a public-facing candidate. I mean, public-facing legislator. She, she's on Twitter and she gets a lot of, support and adulation from the public. But when push comes to shove, she needs votes by her colleagues in the House caucus. So she, and that's where she doesn't do anything. So Nancy's got a point. AOC in 2022, well, who's she going to run against? Is she going to run against, she's not going to run against Schumer. Is she? She's got to run against, if she's going to run in Schumer, yeah.
I'm just thinking Schumer, after the election, he was responding, he was pushing for the checks. He did an about face, and he seems to be pushing for things that aren't really what Schumer pushes for, it seems like.
Well,
he's afraid of a primary challenge, don't you think?
Well, she could try. Here's two things I would say. If I was like on the AOC team saying, let's consider, you running against Schumer in a primary. Okay, so first of all, I want to see how the mayoral race goes in New York City, because this ranked choice thing. Right? So let's see how it goes. Let's see how popular an AOC candidate really is, type of candidate. The other thing about Schumer is that he'll be the majority leader, and he can really bring home things for the state. And that's going to be hard. Not to say, obviously, when the New Yorkers threw out Joe Crowley, who had a ton of power. Okay. They didn't seem to care about that. So let's wait and see. And let's see where, I don't think Schumer's actually worried about that right now, but I could be wrong.
If AOC were really smart
Mm-hmm,
politically,
mm-hmm.
she'd run for mayor.
Yeah,
Because mayor is wide open.
wide open.
Wide open. Anybody could win. Right now, if they held the election today, the comptroller, Scott Stringer, would win. And he'd win just the way de Blasio won, with about 12% of the registered electorate, which is ridiculous, but that's the way the New York system works. She could win that in a whirlwind. The problem is, I think for her, is it's at least the second most difficult job in the United States.
Oh, at least.
Politically. Maybe it's the most difficult.
Yeah.
And I'm not being disrespectful. I think she's been a legislator and she likes being a legislator. I don't think she wants to hear complaints about how they're picking up the garbage on 118th Street.
Right.
That's what being mayor is about.
That's right. That's what being mayor is all about. And yeah, so, but that's interesting. It'll be interesting to see what she ultimately does. Look, here's what I'll say about her. She has a future, a big one, bright one. But you know, there's a process to these things. So yeah. Do you think the financial markets will react to Mnuchin to Yellen's switch? Not in a big way. I do think that the durability of the markets have surprised me during this time. But you know, I'm no economic expert, but one thing about her, Yellen, is they all know her. They aren't scared of her. She's perfectly, you know, acceptable to them. When I say them, you know, Wall Street. And, you know, what she will be is a kind of a calming, stabilizing presence. Not that Mnuchin wasn't, Mnuchin was. But yeah, so I think it'll be fine. I think the regulation that you'll see will mostly be on the climate, kind of in climate change type of, you know, packaging. But, you know, so, you know, you will have people upset about regulation. You always do. We never talked about tech. We've run out of time here, but the hens have come, or the roost, whatever, they've come home to roost with the tech. It's over for tech. They're getting regulated. It's time. And it wouldn't matter if a Democrat or Republican was in the White House, they'd still get regulated. One thing I want to say really quick before we go, I know we were kind of all over the place here, is one of the things that Trump did hand to Republican or to Democrats in Congress, kind of on a silver platter, was DC statehood. He didn't mean to, but he did. DC statehood is probably very imminent. And, you know, the whole thing at the Capitol, the riot at the Capitol, there were so many competing jurisdictions. They couldn't get people in there to help them because of that. So again, they have to do it fast. They have to do it before the midterms in case they lose control of the House or Senate. But DC statehood is probably very real. And then that is 2 Senate seats that are reliably Democrat that will be there forever. So this is something that another way Trump kind of screwed the Republicans in Congress, especially the Senate. And by doing that whole thing with the riots, it just kind of made it very clear that DC needs statehood. So that's an interesting thing that I think could have, you know, it could, whatever, that'll be felt for a while. So I like to end these things by saying that if you guys want to reach out to me with any kind of question, I know I didn't cover everything here. There's so much, but I would be happy to answer them or get on a Zoom or whatever. If you want to reach out to me anytime, I'm happy to do that. And I'm always happy to do these things if there's interest, and because I love talking about it.
Thank you, Kristen. You're great as always.
Yeah, well, thank you. And again, I hope this wasn't too disjointed, but I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Jeremy, you want to sum it up?
I mean, me,
Valerie?
I can if you want. I mean, I love these sessions, all three of them, and the fourth one, the not in the food for thought, the election series. I think it was really great, and we had a few people on the call who were also on the election call. As you can see, I'm also really love talking about this.
Yeah.
And
It's a very interesting time, and it will be for a while. So, we'll, like I said, any question anybody has, just email me.